So now we come back to sex. So I was lucky enough to meet Richard Green before he died. He died a couple of years ago, but I met him in London in, I think, 2018. He was long into retirement by then. And he said to me, where did this all come from? This is insane, he said. Like he was actually very supportive of trans-identified people, and he helped to open one of the first gender clinics in the US, like the one at Johns Hopkins, and he was involved in writing the first press release about it, and he was very supportive of people who didn't feel at ease with their sexed bodies. He was also a very early proponent of gay marriage. He gave evidence in legal cases about how homosexuality wasn't something that should bar you from being a teacher and things like that. Very liberal man, way ahead of his time. But he said to me, nobody would have dreamed of messing around with a child's body or treating a child. What they wanted to know, what he and the others wanted to know in the 1960s and 1970s was, what's the history of somebody who comes to you as an adult and says, I'm really not meant to be this sex. So I'm a man, but I really don't feel like one. Was that man always like that? Was he born like that? Was he like that as a child? So you can't find that by asking people themselves. And this is no insult whatsoever to trans people. This is always true. You can't ask people, how did you get where you're going? You can try and you can get something from it, but people remember their past in a way that's influenced by the present. But also, if you do that, you miss all the people who used to feel the same way and don't anymore, right? Okay. So suppose you had people who are CEOs, and you go to them and you say, what got you where you are today? They'll tell you about hard work and vision and brilliance and things. But what you don't have in front of you is the people who had hard work, vision and brilliance, but didn't succeed. Right? So you miss that entire picture. The only way you can fix that is by doing what's called a prospective study, which is that you get people before they've set up their companies and follow them and see if you can identify what made those who succeed and those who don't different from each other.
Would that you start with them young then?
Yes. So Richard Green identified, just by putting up signs in GP surgeries, like family doctor surgeries and a couple of other places like that, he identified, from memory, like 60 or 70 boys, and he called them sissy boys, not because he was trying to be mean to them. I mean, he specifically was trying to comment on the way they were stigmatized. He was very sympathetic to them and their families. And then he just found some matching kids, because that's the best you could do. He found kids to match each of them in age, socioeconomic circumstance, race, that sort of thing. Another bunch of uncomplicatedly, non-sissy, like masculine boys. Right. And then he just followed them to see what would happen. And what happened was that his so-called sissy boys, all but one of them that he managed to stay in touch with no longer identified as a girl, or said they wanted to be a girl, or said they felt like a girl by the time they reached dating. Just one said he still did. He lost touch with some of them, but I think he had 55 of them at the end. Every single other one had accepted himself as boy or a man, and most of them were gay. Right. So what he discovered then, and what he told me at the time, and I've since followed up on it, was that every study since has found the same thing. If you find small children who spontaneously say to you, God didn't mean to make me a girl, or I wasn't meant to be a boy, I shouldn't have a penis. Like, these little boys would dress up in their sister's clothes, they would tuck their penises inside their pants, they would, they hated everything boysy, they were super girly. And this isn't just them being a bit gender non-conforming, they were really unusual, these kids. I read the book, it's out of print, but I got a copy. This is not just, a girl who likes rough and tumble. It's a girl who insists she's a boy and insists she's a boy for years. Now, Richard Green only looked at boys, but anyway. So since then, there have been a dozen studies in different countries, different times, different research groups, different methodologies. Every single one of them has found that highly gender non-conforming kids who say that they were meant to be members of the opposite sex, don't mostly grow up to still think that, and do mostly grow up to say they're gay.
And those are all the same longitudinal studies. They're not just...
There's a variety of methodologies, but this is the most consistent finding by a long way in this field. Like, it's very, very suggestive when you've got these over about 30 years, 40 years. The most recent and the best of them was in Toronto, and it's only a couple of years old. And it followed every single child at the children's clinic.
Yeah, that was the one I referenced.
Yes, and that was 90%. 90% of the kids no longer.
90, yeah. And that was published in March of 2021.
That's right. And that was a really high quality study. So when you've got all these different studies, some of them were very small, but when you've got them all from different places over different times, over a few decades, people with very different intellectual frameworks, every single one points the same direction. You can say that that's flat. If you have kids who say, I was meant to be a boy, or I feel like I am a boy, or I really am a boy inside, or any of those sorts of sentences, and you do not tell that child, oh, that makes you really a boy. Let's cut your hair, let's change your name, let's dress you as a boy, let's tell everyone else you're a boy. If you don't do that, that child will probably, really, very nearly certainly stop saying it. And they'll do it around before or during the early part of puberty. So if you think about those boys, those little boys who were called sissy boys, and then you think about the girls in other studies who, tore out any hair clips and refused to wear dresses and said they wanted to play rugby and that they wanted to be firefighters and things like that. These kids are expressing what looks like the gender norms of the opposite sex. And what people used to know and have always deliberately forgotten is that gay people are highly gender non-conforming. So every homophobe in the world knows this. Like, every dad who wants his son not to grow up gay knows very, very well that if he looks at the 3-year-old who's borrowing his big sister's tutu and saying, I want to do ballet, he thinks, shit, I've got a gay son. Mm-hmm. And Like we're somehow meant to pretend that's not the case. So that to me also suggests that interest in certain gender norms is hardwired, because we know that being gay is at least to a large extent hardwired. There's several, really a large number of studies that show that at this point, that in men especially, being gay is set either at conception or in the womb, or at least early in life, largely. But those are also the kids who are notably feminine in their tastes and styles. So the two things are connected.
Yeah.
So somebody listening to me might say, oh my God, she believes in gender identity. I don't at all. I believe that the norms that are associated with the two sexes are provably and demonstrably not entirely socially constructed. And I believe that among the ways that gay people are not conforming to the standard for their sex, well, one of them is obviously that they're fancy. They desire their own sex, not the opposite sex. That's the most gender non-conforming thing you can do. But along with that, they're also interested in things that are more standard for the opposite sex. I think it's a big scandal, actually, that this transitioning of kids is mostly happening to gay kids. So if you think about it, if you were an anthropologist from Mars and you landed on this planet, you would notice that especially in America and Canada, there's large-scale sterilization of gay kids happening right now, because the protocols in gender clinics lead to sterility. And the kids who are turning up in gender clinics are really hugely disproportionately kids who would otherwise grow up gay. And that is actually why I wrote the book. It was when I first met detransitioners, every single one of them was gay. Every single one of them had misinterpreted their gender nonconformity as meaning that they were meant to be the opposite sex, and some of them had been sterilized. There were girls who had had hysterectomies at age 21. And so I just thought, this is at the level of the worst medical scandals we've ever seen. This is at the level of lobotomies. We are sterilizing gay kids.